I've got a chart available for those that want one as they leave of 18 different denominations of Mormonism and independence alone. No way!
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Both the Church of Christ Temple Lot and the LDS Church accept the Book of Mormon as the Word of God. Where the two churches differ is often on the Doctrine Covenants, among other things. We'll talk about those other things along with historian Gene Addams and talk about some of the big theological differences between the two churches, as well as similarities. Check out our conversation. Hey, I wanted to mention another podcast out there. It's a brand new one, so it's about civil rights. I have a good friend, Loki Mulholland. We used to be in the same ward. His mom is a little bit of a civil rights icon. She sat in on those Woolworth lunch counter protests and was one of the freedom riders. He's actually written a film about his mom, as well as other topics of civil rights. Now, it's not really a Mormon-themed podcast. It's all about civil rights, and it's called The Uncomfortable Truth. And it will make you uncomfortable. So anyway, check out Loki Mulholland. And he's a good friend of mine, and it's a great podcast. It will open your eyes to a lot of black history and black civil rights history. And it's a fantastic podcast, and it's not just historic history, it's stuff happening today. So check out An Uncomfortable Truth, and as Loki says, let's get uncomfortable. Now back to our conversation.
Well, I know some of the interesting things about the Church of Christ. Let's talk a little bit about some of their theology. For one, they do not accept the Doctrine and Covenants.
That's correct.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? What do they accept?
They accept the Book of Commandments.
Which was the precursor to the Doctrine and Covenants.
Which was the precursor, 1833, was never finished. Was the famous story of the girls gathering up the sheets and running and hiding in the cornfields. That's true. There's another person besides them that also did the same thing. Eventually, all those sheets were put together, and the few books were individually done thereafter. There's not very many of those known to even exist. I think maybe total 18.
18 are known to exist today?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know they're they're more valuable than first edition Book of Mormon.
Oh, 10 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last one I think sold for like $1 million, something like that.
Wow. Well, and I was in the Church of Christ, and I got a copy because they still print it.
Yes.
And use it in their sermons and things like that. It's a lot bigger now. I know in the back of the day it was a tiny book.
Oh yes, about that big.
Yeah, they've made it so that you can read it now. You know, especially if you have bad eyes, like me.
Yes.
And so, and I know that they talk about they don't accept the changes. I know Randy talked about that a lot.
His father would go on and on and on about that.
Because there have been changes to the Doctrine and Covenants that weren't in the original Book of Commandments.
That's correct.
So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I think the Book of Commandments was sent in script form to Missouri, and it was Phelps's job to get it printed. And so Phelps, and probably with the help of Cowdery and John Whitmer, they probably, all of them participated in trying to, edit. You can see marks in the original that show that, somebody was putting a word in here or there to just clean it up. I don't think Joseph ever officially thought that was going to be the final word. It certainly was used as a starting point for the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants. But Bill Sheldon, bless his heart, he made a big deal out of the changes. Some of the changes, of course, are just additions, and a lot of them are cleanups. Words, punctuation, things like that.
I know that...
But it wasn't done. I should add that. There was more to be printed, and the Church of Christ Temple Lot doesn't buy that at all.
Oh, they think that was the whole thing.
They think that's the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know when I spoke with Randy, one of the things he made a big deal about was it's our now Section 20 that has been expanded, and he has said you compare my Book of Commandments with your section 20, and you're going to see the bunch of verses that have been added.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, there were some grammar things,
But there were definitely
but there
some
were
additional.
definitely large sections that were added.
Yep. And I don't think anybody makes a big deal out of that latter-day revelations to Joseph got added in rather than creating a whole new section at some point in time. When I first was introduced to Bill Sheldon, so this is a good one, he even though I had an introduction of all that good stuff, and my wife here is with me, and she's a Hedrickite descendant, and he was enamored with my wife in that relationship.
Oh, wow.
And we eventually, within a couple of weeks, he introduced us to my wife's second cousin that's active member of their church.
Oh, wow.
And we've become very good friends with her.
Mm-hmm.
And her last name is Addams also, but spelled differently.
Oh, okay.
And I became friends with several other members of their church through my research, and still are my friends. But Bill, he started on me with the changes. And I finally said, Bill, stop just for a second. He said, what's that? And I said, can I look at your songbook? And he said, sure. So he gets me a songbook, and I turned it, because I'd been to their church the day before, my first time.
Mm-hmm.
And I happened to notice, the songs that were in there. And one of your songs is on page 1 something. We thank thee, O God. And in Latter-day Saints, we'd say,
For a prophet.
And it says, for the Spirit. And so I said, who changed that? And he laughed and smiled, and he said, me.
Oh, you're kidding.
I said, okay, we're even. Can we go on to something else? And he said, fair deal. And at that point in time, we became good friends. And it turns out my 4th great-grandfather and his 3rd great-grandfather were missionary companions in the 1830s in New York.
No way.
And we suddenly just had all this bonding of family and tradition. And from that time on, we never got into those discussions.
Oh, that's funny.
And on more than one occasion, when I'd be back there doing research in his office, people would come in and ask some questions that were beyond what he knew in terms of some of the history. He'd come and get me out and have me come and talk to him.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny. Well, when I was there, we had a Wednesday night. They had a
Prayer meeting?
No, it was a hymn singing session.
Yes, I've done those
and
too.
so I knew about half the hymns, I'd say, and about half of them I didn't know.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting.
I've done that too. After the lawsuit all gets settled,
Mm-hmm.
then there's another effort to try to become friends again between the Church of Christ and the RLDS.
Oh, really?
And they both set up committees, and that goes on off and on over a period of time, and then it kind of once again runs into some head blocking, with what the RLDS felt like they should join, and then there was the feelings that the only reason they want us is because of the property, and so that kind of unravels, and the efforts kind of ceased. And then with the introduction of what's called supreme directional control within the RLDS Church under Frederick M. Smith, that's when they had several factions splinter off. And that's when I'd say maybe up to 1,000 members of their church left their church and joined with the Church of Christ Temple Lot in the late 1920s and early 1930s.
Oh, really?
And that is a major turning point. And
so in the early part of the 20th century, they were trying to reconcile, and then they didn't reconcile, and
then it went from bad to worse.
Yeah.
And then since then, they've had more committees to try to just be good neighbors and independents.
Okay.
And those have been, and were positive for a while, until about 1950s. And then they brought up, the RLDS Church brought up again the whole thing of the temple lot, that they really did win the lawsuit, at least, round one, and that was declaring that Joseph Smith III was the rightful heir, and it just kind of stirred up the animosity again, and things went sour for a period of time. And
oh, wow.
so it's been this off and on relationship. I wrote an article for the Journal of Mormon History several years ago on 130 years of crossroads and controversies, okay, and dealt with all of that.
Oh, wow. Well, because I believe there was a time, and I want to say it's the 1930s, so please correct me if that's not correct, that they actually tried to build a temple.
Yes.
And then the Depression hit.
That is correct.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the revelation to build the temple was given to one of their apostles, Otto Fetting.
Now, he was an apostle for the temple lot?
Yes. He had been a local leader in the LDS Church. I think it was in Michigan.
Okay.
He became one of their apostles. And
one of the temple lot apostles.
Right. They don't claim to have any one person as like the president of the quorum or the president of the church. It's the quorum of the Council of 12.
Okay.
And so any of them can basically be entitled to receive revelations, and then they bring them and vote on them, and it's more of a democratic process at that point in time.
Okay.
So Otto Fetting has the revelation that the time has come to build the temple, and they went ahead, had a groundbreaking ceremony. I think it was on April the 6th, of course, and that had been 1929.
1929.
You may have seen pictures where they got a big hole dug in the ground.
Yeah, I have seen those.
Okay. That's as far as it got. That was probably done pretty much by 1933, and then between another schism within the Church of Christ Temple lot where Otto Fetting leads all of his people away, because he's now insisting that everybody that joins has to be rebaptized, and those that had come over from the LDS Church didn't feel like they had to be rebaptized because the original agreement between the two churches, Church of Christ and the Temple lot, during one of their periods of positive relationships, was that memberships could be transferred back and forth. So they were basically recognizing the priesthood of the original baptism, so why do you need to be rebaptized?
Oh, that's interesting.
That's the theory behind that. So he has a revelation that you got to be rebaptized. That caused a real fraction, including it would have been Bill Sheldon's father was an apostle in their church, and he was one of the ones that said no, we're going to stick with our understanding, and so Otto Fetting and his group they leave, and he forms his own church, and then they've had several divisions since then. And so to go back on one of your earlier comments on this, Rick, around the temple lot itself, there's 4 visible churches present: the Remnant Church, the Community of Christ, the Church of Christ Temple lot, and the LDS Church. But you only have to go about a block and a half, and you can visit the Church of Jesus Christ Cutlerite.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's 5. And then if you keep widening your circle in Independence, you can come up with 18 different flavors of Mormonism, all in Independence and all separate.
Yeah, it's fun. I love going to Independence. I've run across a few different restoration branches.
Oh, yes.
I even stopped
I count them as one group.
Okay. And I even stopped in the restoration bookstore that the Prices have you been there?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they were pretty nice.
Yeah.
And then, so it just feels like almost anywhere you go, there's a Church of Jesus Christ something, or Church of Christ, or some variation on that name.
Absolutely.
So it's a lot of fun.
And I've gone to a lot of their different breakoff groups to get a flavor.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I need to spend more time there. I could spend a lot of time there.
It's been a great blessing in my life, really, to get to meet a lot of these wonderful people and become friends with them and share information and just have a good time.
Yeah, well, cool.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with historian Gene Addams. In our next conversation, we'll talk about a big attempt at reconciliation between the Church of Christ, the RLDS Church, and the LDS Church.
In fact, in 1900, the Church of Christ met with the elders in the Church of Christ, met with the presidency in Lamoni of the RLDS Church, and wanted to know if they would agree to a 3-church get-together to see if they could resolve their differences. And that meant, of course, making a trip to Salt Lake City.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.